My name is Rebecca Parsons. I'm the Chief Technology Officer Emerita of ThoughtWorks, a software consulting company. The Emerita just means I've turned over all the internal responsibilities to my successor, Rachel Laycock, and I'm focusing primarily on technical issues. So things, evolutionary architecture and programming languages are of particular interest to me. It's actually generative AI in parentheses because it's AI more broadly as well as generative AI because many of the issues are the same. And what I'm trying to talk about are what are the architectural implications of artificial intelligence? What are the considerations and the patterns that we need to think about as we bring AI systems into our broader enterprise systems? And then how does this change the role of the architect? Because we have different things we have to think about than we did before. One of the things that AI is now different than the AI of the past is it used to be that if you were working with AI, you were probably an AI researcher or at least a computer scientist. And now, accountants and marketing people and electricians and anybody can interact directly with systems like ChatGPT. And so I think many processes are going to be very different because you've got a much broader set of people looking at it. From the perspective of software delivery, though, we are seeing impacts of using AI systems across the entire software development lifecycle. We have, obviously, the coding assistants, and that's really what most people think about when they think about AI and software delivery is the coding assistants. We're using it for scenario generation as a brainstorming partner. It's being used to generate test data or test scenarios. To flesh out requirements or perhaps find gaps in things that are specified. And so across the entire life cycle, observability is being impacted as well because one of the strengths of AI is pattern recognition. And so from an observability and security perspective, we're using it. In fact, this is a use case that's been around for a long time for fraud detection. But you can extend that to broader observability in a system and trying to detect when something is going wrong with the system and perhaps why it's going wrong. The way I think about this topic is there are different kinds of impacts of architecture on or because of AI. And so one thing to think about is what are the new patterns? What are the new architectural and design patterns that are going to come into play with AI as part of the system? Are there particularities, these architectural characteristics, that become more important in the presence of AI? So that's kind of how AI is changing the nature of architecture. The second then is what are some of the specific questions you now have to ask? And how do you approach this? And what's your criteria for deciding how you might want to deploy this within your system? And then there's the role of the architect, because that role is changing. It's been changing for a long time. Architecture used to be very simple. In fact, we didn't even talk about it as something different. My architecture class when I was in university was chip design. How does the computer chip actually work? And now we have security architecture and data architecture and technical architecture, network architecture, enterprise architecture. And so the field of architecture has gotten much more broad. And then you toss AI into the mix. And we have to be able to, as architects, explain, for example, to the business, what is the risk that you're taking on as an enterprise by deploying this customer service chatbot? There's a famous story from Air Canada deployed a ChatGPT-based chatbot, which made up a policy about refunds in the case of bereavement. And the courts there said, yes, you have to do that refund because you had control of that system and it told your customer that he could get his money back. And so there are risks that come with AI systems that we have to, as technologists and architects, help our business counterparts really understand what those consequences are. One of the things to keep in mind about the role of the architect is their job is to think long-term. I often describe this as, a development team's purpose and success metric is to get features out as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, with the highest possible quality. And it's a very short-term cycle. The architects, particularly when you go to the role of, say, enterprise architecture, is all about maintaining the asset value of the entire IT estate. And as that estate becomes more complex, trying to figure out what's the best way to approach this from a manpower development perspective, or from a tool proliferation perspective, or risk mitigation. There are all kinds of problems that we didn't used to have to deal with. And so I think the fundamental skill set is still the same, although having an understanding of AI and some of the specific issues that are raised by AI is critical for an architect in today's world. There have been studies done on code since coding assistants have come into play. Quite recently, for example, Google asserted that 25% of their code is now generated by a coding assistant. But in looking at those commits, and you can go into GitHub and get all kinds of statistics, what they're finding is that the size of the commits are getting bigger because the code generators or the coding assistants are better at creating new code than they are at modifying existing code. There was one particular study done that the best the coding assistants did on normal refactorings was they got it right 33% of the time. Now, how long do you think you'd stay in a job if you got it wrong 2/3 of the time? And so there are going to be implications for the code that is being generated. One thing I've heard many people say is, we're getting really good at generating bad code faster. That's not really what we want. And so one of the things we have to do as well is to start to look at what are the tests that we should put into our builds to ensure that we're tracking the debt that is being imposed by that. But also, are there other ways that we can perhaps improve the coding assistance or add a different phase to the process? Several years ago, when I was a university professor, I was on a panel and somebody said, everybody who becomes a professor, has it in their mind that that's what they're going to do. When I went into graduate school, I said I would never be an assistant professor of computer science, but that's what I ended up doing. And so I would say that my career and my journey has been more about taking advantage of the situations that I'm in, taking advantage of the contacts that I make to move to different fields. I've worked in academia, government research, manufacturing, technology, consulting, across the board. Our industry has a real problem with the culture of technology. We have a rock star complex where we forgive these high-profile, talented male developers when they say obnoxious things and when they create a hostile environment. And so I think first and foremost, it's the recognition that, women are people too. We want to be treated with respect. We want to be given opportunities to advance. It's not that we want, to be forgiven every mistake that we make, but let's not beat people into the ground when they do make a mistake. And so I think a lot of it has to do with simply accepting the fact that some women are incredibly capable. I'm not saying all women are better than all men, but there are a lot of men, unfortunately, who think that all men are better than almost all women. And that's simply not true. Some of us have a real affinity for math and computer science, others don't, but that's the same for men. And I think that it's that recognition, because fundamentally, one of the things I've learned over the years is in the minds of many men, it's perfectly fair if there are two men vying for one position and they're equally qualified, you have to pick one. Maybe you don't like their hair color, or maybe you don't like the football team that they support, but you got to pick something, and no one ever says that's unfair. The minute it's a man and a woman equally qualified, that's unfair. And the only way that statement makes sense is if the underlying assumption is they can't be equal. There has to be something, an unfair advantage being given to the woman because she needs it. And to me, that's the flawed basic assumption, is that a woman can never be as good as a man. My advice to young women entering the computer science and technology field is really twofold. The first is never forget that learning is fun, because you're not going to know the new technology that comes out in 2 years. Nobody does. And so looking at it as something fun, I get a chance to learn about this new thing, is going to allow them to continue to grow in their career. And the second thing is to form a network. I remember when I was an undergraduate, I was in a class where there were 58 people and only 4 women. And the professor actually got up and said, women are incapable of understanding math and computer science. And so the 4 of us got together and decided we're going to prove that idiot wrong. I think 3 of us would have made it even if we were by ourselves, but there was a 4th who came from a family and she was always told math is hard and all of this kind of stuff. I think she would have dropped out, but she didn't. We stuck together. All 4 of us got A's in the class. And from our perspective, we proved the idiot wrong. And so having somebody just to vent to say, I'm really frustrated because this thing happened, that's so critical to keeping going. I'm really excited that we're getting back to in-person events because, number one, as a presenter, presenting to that little green dot is horrible. You get no feedback. And being able to speak again to a live audience and interact and see their responses and know even that they're laughing at the joke when they're supposed to. So as a presenter, it's wonderful to be back in person. But as an attendee, I also think the ability to ask questions, to go up to somebody and say, I heard you talking about this, and I find that really interesting. That ability to interact and learn from each other and share with each other is, to me, a real gift.